Well, I think we'd better get started, eh? Looking back at what we've done, remember, immanence. The living distinguishes itself from the non-living by immanence. I see something and I benefit from the seeing of something. I eat, I benefit from the nutrition. I think, I will, I understand, I listen, I do it for me. Immanence, remaining within. Remember that. Immanent, in maneo, remain within. That's what characterizes the living. All the actions of the living are immanent actions. So, self-perfective actions. Each one of those things is a perfection of ourselves. We saw that plants are singly immanent. They can give themselves the exercise of the act. We saw that brute animals are doubly immanent. They give themselves the do and the form. They give themselves the form. So they know when the dog sees the hare, he gives himself the form of chasing the hare. He not only gives himself the exercise or the do, but he gives himself the what he's going to chase. But man goes one step further. He gives himself why. He's trebly, threefold immanence. I should have put this on the board for you, I'm sorry. But the plant is singly immanent, the brute animal is doubly immanent, man is trebly immanent. We're going to see there a higher immanence. There's a beautiful text in St. Thomas I've always loved. I gave a lecture on it one night, and there were largely teaching brothers in front of me. And one elderly brother came up after class, "Doctor, that's the most brilliant lecture I've ever heard on the Blessed Trinity." I said, "Well, none of it's mine, brother. It's all St. Thomas. Every bit of it." It came from the Summa Contra Gentiles, Book 4, Chapter 11. And you've got it now, the notes I just sent out the other day. And we'll go through that. It shows that in God, even what he does is his own substance. It's all identified because he's pure actuality, pure isness, pure being. He said himself, "I am who am." When Moses said, "Who are you, Lord? I've got to tell the boys down at the bar who you are when they talk about this." He said, "I am who am." And I shudder when I see, even in missalettes, "I am who I am." That's utterly false. It's not in the Bible at all. It's a false translation. I am who am. Not I am who I am, because I am who I am and you are who you are. Don't forget, plants are singly immanent. They merely do the act for themselves. Their nature and purpose is fixed by their nature. Brutes not only do the act for themselves, but specify the form, whether it's going to chase a giraffe, a hare, or Elizabeth. The dog fixes that for himself. But man can have a purpose. For the brute animals, the purpose is fixed by nature. And it's not remarkable that what they do, etc. Some things are fixed by nature. For instance, man will become friends with another man, or with a dog, or even fall in love with a plant, as I've heard people say, which I find very odd, frankly. But man can fix a purpose. For instance, eating is fixed by nature that it nutrifies the body. But why is Joe exercising this act of eating here and now? It may be a business meeting. It may be he's trying to make up for something he did to his wife. He might have mistreated or something. Now he's taking her out to dinner. Could be 1,000 purposes. Man can give himself the purpose. Remember, we saw this before. There are two ends in human actions. Only in human actions. Two ends. So there's the end of the agent. Can you read this all right?
Yes. Yeah.
And the end of the act. End of the agent, end of the act. Now the end of the agent, this is free. I bet you can't read that one. This is free. For example, it might be a business meeting, it might be friendship, it might be 1,000 things. But the end of the act is nutrition. That's fixed by nature. The Romans treated that very badly. They ate, and they didn't allow the nutrition. They'd go to the vomitorium, tickle the back of the throat, or take ipecacuanha wine or something, and go to the vomitorium. They treated that as free, but it's not. That's what nature intends. So the nutrition is shoved aside for the pleasure of eating. And that's what the problem is, the fundamental problem today with homosexuals and all those other people out there who are thinking that the sole reason for eating is pleasure. And the sole reason for marrying is love. Whereas nature has fixed other reasons for these functions. So there are two ends, and it's this one we ought to allow. This one we're free to choose them as long as it's not an evil end. For instance, if what was the story about the husband, the gentleman who said to his wife, he's dying, and she says, "Quiet, my love. Just rest and stay quiet and don't say anything. You must get plenty of rest. He's dying." And he said, "But I've got confessions to make and I must clear my soul before I die." "Hush, hush," she says. He says, "I was playing around with your sister and your mother and your mother's sister." She said, "Yes, I know. That's why I poisoned you." So that's the so that could be an evil end, giving medicine that would poison him. Look at the girl that died the other day. She drank too much water. That's been known for years, many, many years. I remember reading that when I think it was in my teens, somebody dying from drinking too much water. And she was pouring it into herself. It destroys the balance of electrolytes, etc., and probably removes them too, with too frequent urination sort of thing. Anyway, so much for all that. Now, last time, we went through the vegetative psychology, we went through sensitive psychology, and we're in intellective psychology now, to do with the intellect. And we were dealing with a very major problem. You know, what's so funny about contemporary philosophy is these problems don't seem to occur to the philosophers. Woodbury brings that out in some place. The distinction between what something is and whether it is. Essence and existence. The distinction between those two doesn't seem to have occurred to contemporary philosophers. I remember one professor we had at Niagara University said to me about the problem of the possible. He was at the Institute of Medieval Studies, the Pontifical Institute of Medieval Studies at Toronto. He said, "I'd never even heard of the problem." This is their historical method. They study everything historically and don't study it in the scientific order. In other words, according to the order of the particular science. And he'd never heard of the problem. The distinction between why are some things possible and others are not. One woman walked out of this class and said, "I showed contempt for God by saying that God can't do everything. God can't make something which is not makeable. That's not a defect in God. For instance, a square circle. He can't make a square circle because squareness and circularity are mutually exclusive. So that's not a criticism of God. That shows the perfection of God. He can do the greatest things, but his mind, like ours, rejects things that are absurd. To make a four-legged man, all right, a child was born recently in the last few months, wasn't it? Four-legged. They amputated 2 of the legs. Nothing contradictory in that. But when something is contradictory, it's not possible. Follow that, Elizabeth? When it's absurd, nobody can make it. And it's not a defect in God to say that he can't make it. It's not an attack upon him. For instance, square circle, non-rational man, rational dog, they're all absurdities. Dogginess excludes rationality. Rationality excludes dogginess. That'll do. So that's not a criticism of God to say that he can't do those things. We're presuming upon the existence of God here. We'll deal with that in this class, though properly it belongs to metaphysics, but we can also include it in this course too. Anyway, so these things, the very idea of the distinction between the nature of a thing and its existence doesn't seem to occur to these people. It's like the passions. There are 11 basic passions that we'll see later. We'll deal with that in detail later, so I wouldn't even write it down now. But you get books that say, like Woodworth, if I remember correctly, 102 passions. And he's distinguishing them according to a purely subjective method. No objectivity in it at all, because they don't divide according to ends. If there are 2 things are related, like the human will and this end, or this and that, you must take into account both relations, both aspects, both elements. That's something which is a basic logical need. So we'll come to that. Now what we got to last time, we dealt with the appetites. Remember, the knowledge brings the world into us. Appetites, we go out to the world. And then, after dealing with that, what do we get to? We got to page 40, wasn't it, I think? 40, 41? 41. And we came to, in a way, philosophy's biggest problem, the universal. How does our mind get the universal? I've never seen man walking around the street. I've never talked to man, but I've talked to this man or that man, the individual, the singular. Well, the philosophers down through the ages wanted to know, how do we get the universal? We saw different attitudes to this. Remember, the universal is infinite. Now that doesn't mean to say it's an infinite concept. What I mean by that, it applies to any number of men. Any man that's created, this term man applies to him. I'm using the term man generically here, of course, including man and woman and child. So the term universal includes millions. Remember the origin of the term in Latin? Unum versus alia. That's one, in other words, the term man, one block of reality, which is only in the mind, man, towards others. Man with a relationship to others. Well, how many does alia, others, how many does it mean? An infinite series, if you wanted to. Infinite group. No end of men. If there are billions and billions of men to come, men, women and children to come, they're all included in this term man. So it's an infinite concept. How do we leap from Bob to man? How does the mind do that? These men were very profound in their thinking. Aristotle, beautiful Anaxagoras. We've only got a few pages, couple of 2 or 3 pages of his writing. That's all we've got. And I just love those fragments, as they're called. I have the fragments of the ancient philosophers' books on the home, and Anaxagoras stands out beautifully. Somebody said once he spoke like a wise man amongst drunkards. Beautiful stuff. He saw that the human mind, in order to know all, must have none in its nature. Sight, to know all colours, must have none in its nature. Hearing, to know all sounds, must have none in its nature. The intellect must have none in its nature. If it did, then everything it knew would be fixed in terms of that. The ear can't see, the sight can't hear. It operates according to its nature, receive the form of colour. And hearing receive the form of sound. But if hearing, for instance, had any sound built in its nature, then everything it would hear would be in terms of that sound. Likewise with sight. And the same with the intellect. And it was Anaxagoras, about 24 centuries ago, who said that first. Aristotle took it up, and he saw the import of what it is. He saw the importance of it. Therefore, the mind, since it can know all bodies, must have none of them in its nature. Therefore, it's spiritual. It's immaterial. Then St. Thomas took it up even again. And all those others that follow St. Thomas, Cajetan, Bilois, Jonathan Thomas, Jean Pinceau, all those people Jean Pinceau, is Jonathan Thomas, and all those people who came after all saw that. So what we want to know is how these men saw this. And we saw that Plato and Socrates, they didn't think that the concept was in our minds. They thought it is somewhere else, in another world, in a world, an unseen world. And when I see Mr. and Mrs. What was your name again? Varani. But when I see them, it reminds me of what my soul saw in another world. They were trying to interpret this. They didn't have enough people before them to give them information about this. They tried to interpret it. Where is man? It's in another world. And our minds saw it before the soul came into the body. This is their teaching. Then when it came into the body, it caused me, when I say these people, oh yes, I remember that was in that other world. So the mind, they don't explain how it was in the other world, except it was somehow imprinted on his mind and they remembered it from then. We saw that Avicenna had a method. I have an original work on Avicenna at home. His Metaphysics is beautiful. These were great men, these Arabs, these Muslims. Avicenna actually was a Persian, but he was brought up in the culture of the Muslims. And he said that what happens is there's an agent intellect, and it operates on the image and produces on the possible intellect, it produces an imprint. But this agent intellect is something which is way above us. It's like a great angel, if you like. Call it what you like. The ancients used to speak about the intelligences. That's what they call the angels, intelligences. Or spiritual substance, they sometimes speak of too. So, the agent intellect operated the image in my mind and produced the image in my imagination and produced the concept in the possible intellect. So man is produced here by this great spirit. Now there's Avicenna. Now Averroes, he went a step further. And I'm going to put on the computer for you the very text of Aristotle where he draws all this out. The trouble is, the metaphysics I have of Avicenna, translated originally from the Arabic treatment of St. Thomas. It's in, the one I have is in French, so I know that won't be much good sending that to lots of people, but at least we can give you Aristotle, which is in English, which you can get in English. I've got it in Greek and Latin and English. But the Asian intellect operates on the image for, now this is Averroes, and he said that the possible intellect is also a great intellect away from us. It's not us at all. Where does that put us? In this situation, you could say, give somebody a punch in the nose and say, the devil made me do it. I didn't do it, the angel made me do it. Put the idea in my mind. Result is our culture collapses. It's gone. I did not produce the ideas in my mind, and I'm carrying them out as a slave for this great intelligence that's directing me. Now imagine at Paris University, the Dominican Fathers had just been founded. There were Jesuits and others, Franciscans. But,
Not Jesuits.
oh no, not Jesuits. They came later with what's his name? St. Ignatius. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Franciscans. Yes, Franciscans have shown a lot of good scholarship. Surprising. It surprises me every time I see the Franciscan mentioned in scholarship. There were some good men, and because the Dominicans had only just been founded, but they had battles on their hands, tremendous battles, because all the universities of the world sprung from two in Italy, and all other universities really sprang out of those by the scholars who got degrees and established universities, etc. But Paris was the main university of the world in those days. I've forgotten now actual figures, but you know, they have something like 50,000 in the Faculty of Arts and things like that. The figures in the books are most extraordinary. When they had debates, there'd be 10,000 listening to the debate, that sort of thing. So, but this took all responsibility away from us. They had misinterpreted Aristotle. Aristotle stated Anaxagoras' teaching, and then carried forth what followed from that, but they misunderstood it. Now, the next one I was going to deal with, I'm going to skip St. Thomas because, for the moment, he said both of these are in us, in our soul. They're faculties or powers of our soul in each of us. So, which is what Aristotle said too, as St. Thomas points out. But St. Augustine, who was influenced more by Plato and somewhat by Aristotle, he didn't ignore Aristotle. There are lots of people think that he had nothing to do with Aristotle, but he did. And he was guided by the teaching of the Holy Trinity. And this is what he said. Again, we'll have a diagram. He said, first of all, there's God, the Father. He has an idea of himself. And an idea in God is co-substantial. That's to say, it is the very substance of God. You don't have all bits and pieces, powers, faculties, arms, legs, and minds, and passions. They're all substantial in God. His substance is absolutely unique. And we prove that when we prove the existence of God. Because if he had ideas, now, diverse things are not from themselves united, but if they are found united, then there's one cause of their unity. There's a principle we'll bring out later. In other words, there's something needed to unite them, so he wouldn't be God. Lots of people misunderstand that. So the Father produced the Word. And the Latin word for word is verbum. The Greek word is logos. What's the Spanish word for word in? Could you tell me, please?
Palabra.
Which is?
Palabra.
Palabra. Thank you. We have a professor of Spanish here with us tonight. So, So that's right. Yes, I remember that now. So the word there, and God loves that. He loves what he is. It's so magnificent, pregnant with beauty. All the beauty you can think of the world is, first of all, in him. All the richness of ideas, first of all, are in him. He's the model for all this. So he loves that. And that brings, that, I shouldn't put that over there, too close to the other. For diagrammatic purposes, I want it a bit separate. Say we'll put up here. There's the Holy Spirit. I deplore what I hear sometimes. Holy Ghost seems pretty good to me, good old Anglo-Saxon. And I deplore what I heard one night at Dive University, a pro-life group saying the rosary, using your instead of thee and thou. I love good, ancient English. There's a poetic beauty in it, which seems to be missed by a lot of the youth today. So, God says what he is, and is the only person who could say it. No idea could possibly contain it. And he loves it. And that spiration, that's a spiration. That spiration or gasp is expressing his love for what he is in himself. Now, that idea says this, encompasses this. I'm thinking right at the moment of 90 Mile Beach in Australia. Now that's too big a beach to think about. 7 Mile Beach. They name beaches sometimes in Australia based upon the length. I've stood and looked at 7 Mile Beach. It runs out of sight. Imagine how many grains of sand there are on that 7 Mile Beach. Billions and billions of grains of sand. Think of all the cells in the body of a kangaroo, a Red Plains kangaroo, 6 foot tall. Think of how many cells there are in the body. All functioning and all its functions known and caused by the operation of God. Now, I remember Sir Charles Bickerton Blackburn gave a lecture when he was Chancellor of the University of Sydney in Australia. He was a surgeon. And he gave this lecture one night on infinity. He said, try and think about space. How far does it go? No matter how far you go, you're not yet near infinity. Because infinity, the infinite is that which when you've taken all you can take, there's still more to come. No matter how much you take, there's more to come. Best way of putting it. No matter how much you take, there's more to come. It's never finished. Unfinished, that's the meaning of the word. Without finish. That's only a drop in the word, the divine word. It's only a little speck. The infinite. So this is super infinite. Everything in the world that you take is pre-contained in that. That's the model. Because in every producer, every artist, there's first a model in him of what's to be produced. And that model is pre-contained there. So there's where man is, according to Augustine. Everything is contained as a model from that. He gave his teaching there based upon the Trinity of the Church, because he knew that must follow.
When you say that, you're talking about from the Word?
Yeah, from Word, yeah.
Okay.
The Word is the plan, the pre-planning of everything that's in production. And one of the things is, one great principle in philosophy is, a many is necessary because when a few will not suffice. So why was this gentleman produced? Because this one and this one and this one aren't sufficient to show all that man can be. So what's being produced is to show the magnificence of that sharing with us his very nature. So everyone that's produced in the world is participating in that divine word by their very existence. A many is necessary when a few will not suffice. Same with dogs. Why are there many dogs? Because one's not good enough to manifest all that dogginess can manifest. Therefore, This little lady, Elizabeth, is unique in the history of the world. It manifests a part of the splendor of the divine nature. And in the whole history of the world, never was there one like her, nor is there one like her now, nor is there one in the future. Therefore, when one fails in why they're here, it's a disaster. It would be considered in a nation as if war had been declared by a superpower on the United States. It's an awful blunder when one person destroys themselves. So when some poor old fella, driven by wine, frightful hunger, nobody to help, alone, it's a disaster if he goes and commits suicide, or even if he dies. But to help that person in a work of corporal mercy or bodily mercy is a great thing. So this is that's Augustine's teaching, where he saw it through Christian eyes. And this is, as Woodbury puts it beautifully, that Christian theology can inspire philosophers and bring up new problems that other people have never even thought of. I've read proofs of the existence of God in books that I have at home. I got, I don't know, dozens of the darn things, what we call anthologies, which is all the philosophers are teaching from today. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of something else, and throw it out in front of the students and let the students try and work out things that philosophers themselves took centuries to work out, and hope that they'll get somewhere with it. But these problems, they don't know these great problems. They're not, if they do, they're never expressed anywhere. You become a specialist today in Kant. Then somebody becomes a specialist in Kant's, one of his books. Then a specialist in one of his pages, one of his paragraphs. And somebody said, and what about where a period should go, here or there? He's a specialist in things like that. So, there it is. God loves what he's like. And his love expressed in the Holy Spirit. And his love went this far that he creates things in the universe. And that everything is an image of his maker. There's an image of his maker. There's an image of his maker. There's an image of his maker. Of its maker, rather. So, I'm explaining this all in terms of St. Augustine. I came to reading St. Augustine later in life, and somehow I love it when he speaks about very nice argument, which I've not heard elsewhere, on capital punishment and things like that, and murder, suicide, very beautiful stuff. So, this shows the history of man's efforts to understand man and his intellective operation. So, thus as Aristotle and St. on page 42, thus as Aristotle and St. Thomas showed, the following is the true description. Note the use of potency and act. Remember what I've said before. You don't read them in the modern textbooks. Potency, potency and act. I didn't say squeeze me. Take that look off your face. Anyway, I've done that to students when they've said, oh, pardon, excuse me, they say, I will not squeeze you. You get some funny reactions. But with the senses now, on page 42. Potency and act. The principles of being, that's what they are. We studied them in metaphysics last year, you'll remember. So, just wondering how much time we've got.
7 minutes.
Yes. What we've got, and this is explaining how the intellect operates and how the senses operate. We start with the senses, which are more evident. So the potentially visible, there's the tree in the dark. Now supposing we're in the dark in this room. Is the book on the table visible? Or is it actually visible, or is it potentially visible? is potentially visible. Now you turn the light on. Is it actually visible or potentially visible? It's actually visible. But there's still no one in the room yet. In comes Dennis. Now it becomes actually seeable. Dennis takes a look at it. Now it's actually seen. We go from potency to act. The whole of philosophy can be written on the back of a postage stamp with potency and act. Just those two words. So supposing there's no light, we're perfectly in the dark, the book is only potentially visible. If we put the light on, now it's actually visible. If somebody comes into the room and sees it, now it's actually seen. And these two are identical. Being seen and be seeing. This could be, Joe could be seeing, and the book is being seeable, or being seen. Strictly, that's the one act. To be seen and to be seeing are the one act. Because the seeing demands an object, and the object is the book. The active sight is the book. So that's all on page 42 for you, set out there. The book is potentially understandable. I'm sorry. We're switching to the intellect. The human intellect. Something is potentially understandable, maybe the book. The ancient intellect makes it actually understandable. The possible intellect makes it actually understood. I did leave out the critical part of seeing. Let's do that again. The book is potentially visible. What makes it actually visible? Light. Now, a seer comes into the room. What makes it go from actually visible to actually seen? The seer. It's all set out on page 42 for you. Actually seen. Now, Bob is potentially seeing, and when the book comes and the light comes on, Bob actually sees. But actually seen, the book, and actually see are really the one act. That's worth reflecting over. Really the one act. Now the human intellect. Something is potentially understandable. Now when we use the word potentially, there's the first potential. When we have Ibble, there's the second potentiality. So the potentiality for the tree in the dark is rendered actual by light. The same when the human intellect is, or the thing understood by the object of the human intellect is understandable, that's the agent intellect does that. Makes it actually understandable. And actually understood is made from potential to actual by possible intellect. You see, potentially understandable to actually understandable to actually understood. And Bob goes from potentially understands to actually understands. But they're the one act. The same as I'm looking at Mrs. Venari. Her being looked at and me doing the looking is the one act. So we identify with the tree in the one act. Remember that what we're doing is receiving the form of the tree or the form of the book, and that becomes the form of our action. So by my intellect, I become those things. Anaxagoras, 24 centuries ago, said that, but you'll search in vain in modern textbooks of philosophy for that, outside the Thomistic school or the Aristotelian school. So that's the human intellect. That's what these Arabs and others all missed. That we have to have two intellects. And St. Thomas goes on to prove that they are part of the human soul. If it were true that there was a great intelligence that made us do things, another intelligence that understood for us, then we're responsible for nothing. And you remember Flip Wilson? The devil made me do it. So there we are. Now the angelic intellect, now note, we can work this out. We can reason it out for ourselves. The angel actually understandable according to himself. He's actually understandable because he's raised from the singular to the universal. He's already has no matter, so he's perfectly intelligible. And he's actually understood because when he turns his mind to himself, he can understand himself. He goes from from potentially understands, and from actually understandable, to actually understood. So note that, reflect on that. It's the only way to grab it. The angel actually is understandable because there's no matter in his nature. Now we can't prove the existence of angels, but the ancients did. They thought they proved it. They had some very weird ways of doing it, but it makes a lot of sense. We can do it in another way, a probable way. We've got minerals, we've got plants, we've got man, and we can know the existence of these. What a gap! Does that explain all the word? What's possible in the word? Or manifest all that God can be? Hardly. There's a tremendous gap. And the ancients even reasoned, in Aristotle's time, for instance, there are probably about 42 angels. And each angel fills a species. There's no matter in it. There's an old saying, apud angelos, amongst angels, quod sunt species, tot sunt individui. How many species there are, so many individuals. Or you can put it the other way around. How many individuals there are, so many species. So Michael fills the whole species of human race. It's as if he were the whole human race. And I usually say there in the classroom, so don't play around with the Ouija board. You're not playing with it, it's playing with you. You're dealing with an intellect mightier than any man that ever lived. In fact, mightier than the whole human race, the least of angelic beings. So be careful, my friends. So that gap there needs to be filled. So suppose that that's just a gap and there's nothing there, doesn't make sense. And Christian revelation confirms that. We can't prove it philosophically, but we can show the reasonableness of it, as I just showed you. And the ancients saw that. They even reasoned out how many they thought there would be, because they thought God used every angel as an intermediary, which he might, to do his tasks, to carry out his tasks. So they reckon there were about 42 tasks that need to be carried out. So now God. How can we know what God is, says somebody? He's actually understood according to himself. He's not only actually understandable, but he's actually understood according to himself. Aristotle said, God is an act of understanding. The understand of an understand. He's not an understander, but he's an actual understood. He's a pure act of understanding, because there's no distinction between God and his acts. He's a pure understanding, which is the act of understanding of an act of understanding. In other words, he's the understander and he's the understood. The object of his own act of understanding is his own act of understanding. It's consubstantial. So he actually understands, actually understandable, actually understands, and actually understands himself, and is actually understood by himself. So Read that through, friends. Try and get your mind around it. It's not difficult. When you first hear it, you think it's strange. But this is the way the ancients, the medievals, argued about these things. So we'll see that after we have a break. In another way, we'll see different expressions of it. I put in a number of expressions to make it as intelligible as possible. But those things don't seem to occur to modern philosophers. Some theological books have them still, but rare is it to find a thing like that in modern books of philosophy. But it must be, things are potentially understood. I mean, somebody say, what do you think of such and such a book? Well, I don't know, I haven't read it. It's only potentially understandable as far as I'm concerned. Then when I've read it, then it now becomes actually understood. But I've got to get it and read it first to make it understandable. Then I've understood it. But sometimes you can have something that you can even think you understand. But then suddenly a glimmer comes through the mind and you know now it's actually understood. The real argument. I'll never forget when the first time I really grasped the first way of proving the existence of God. It suddenly hit me. You only have to know 3 movements. Amongst themselves, 3 subordinate movements. That's all you've got to know. And the rest jumps right into place. Please take a break.